Hi.
Hello.
So, welcome to the Happy Hour podcast.
Thank you very much.
This episode is called Where There's a Will. Yes,
nice.
I am Will, your host, and
Yeah.
you are Will Brown,
Yeah.
the music composer.
Yeah.
So, do you want to start off by giving me a little introduction to yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I, a musician, obviously, studied music, and I there's two main strings to my bow, just excuse the obvious pun, but the kind of composition side of things for TV generally, but all sorts of media. And then I do a lot of my own music. It's kind of electronic, but not really dance music. I released that under the alias of Brecon. But it's, kind of like, it sounds a bit fancy if I'm saying it's intelligent electronic music, but that's, it's not dance music, I suppose, is the main thing.
Yeah.
Think kind of John Hopkins and that kind of stuff. And then, so for my own composing for TV, it is mainly TV, bits of sound design, but the majority of it is kind of composition in a variety of styles. And in terms of like a specific style that I work within, where I'm kind of happiest, I think, is joining the worlds of electronic and more kind of contemporary classical, so that kind of hybrid sound. But equally, I quite enjoy the challenge of writing to whatever.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
You've done some work for major brands such as McDonald's, Barclays, Foster's. Do you want to tell me a bit about how you got to working with brands like that, from sort of, you started out as a musician. How did you get to advertising?
Quite often it's the situation, there isn't a direct route in, and it's kind of a lucky break or kind of a little connection. And my story is kind of similar in terms of I started off being asked just by a friend of mine who was doing some production music or library music to do a couple of tracks for an album, which I did. But actually, it was like, I was maybe 20 or something like that. Didn't do a particularly good job in terms of hitting the brief. So they weren't used for that album, but the company really liked them and wanted to use them for a different project. And that's how I kind of first got into it. But that was, and so for quite a while, I suppose, after then, I was writing music for library music, which I think was really useful for me to kind of cut my teeth on or in terms of, there's a very specific skill in being given a brief and translating that musically and kind of understanding what the client actually wants. So I did that for kind of 10 years or so. And then in terms of the bigger companies and kind of getting into advertising, I suppose in a way, again, it's kind of a lucky break through another friend. I think she was trying to pitch one of my tracks that I'd done through Brecon, my kind of electronic, the music that I do for kind of Love. And that didn't come across or didn't come through. But the ad agency had a very specific brief that I think was slightly inspired by that track. So then got me to do a new composition that was for the McFlurry's thing that I did, which was kind of one of the more, one of the bigger brands that I've worked on. And it's there isn't quite often, there's not a set route and there's not one way of doing things. And I think it's really just off the back of learning and developing skills and knowing people. But both of the kind of, a lot of things happen through friends rather than, in this industry, there's not really job adverts as such.
That's it, yeah.
So, yeah.
And in terms of compositions, what's the process like? Do you, I assume you play instruments.
Yeah.
And I assume you mix things digitally. How does that process come to be? Say you get a brief from a client and they say, I want it sounding a bit like this. Where do you go? How do you start?
I think it's particularly difficult with music. I suppose it's the case for all sectors of the creative industry, but particularly with music, talking about music. What's the quote about? Or was that maybe about architecture? I can't think now. But that you can't, if you have to talk about it, it's not doing its job. Or, because it's very difficult to express a true feeling or style or aesthetic of music with words, and it can be done, but I think quite often it's so much more useful to have some reference points, even if it's just, this is completely the wrong instrumentation, but this feeling is what we're after, or the opposite of this is the complete wrong feeling, but we really like this instrumentation, or whatever it might be. So I think that's something that I always try and establish very early on, is kind of like almost what is it not, what emotion do you not want, and then after a few different conversations to get to the point where the emotion and the feeling and then also the style. I think a lot of people, especially as musicians, I think when you're trained to know technically how music works, I think it's easy to forget about what the end result is going to be. And if you're watching an advert, for example, you need to feel a certain way, and that's got to match up with the brand. So I think feelings and emotions, I think, are overlooked quite often. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in terms of the actual production of it, are you by yourself? Do you create all the sounds?
Yeah, so it depends on the brief. I work very closely with a really close friend of mine for a lot of projects, but it really depends. I think having people, you're never going to be able to do all of the styles on all the instruments to the best of your ability. You're going to have strengths and you're going to have weaknesses, and I think bringing other people on board is really, really important. But I always ensure that I'm overseeing the project, and in terms of where do I start, I think technology these days is so good in terms of almost any instrument you can kind of get a fairly decent replica within software. It's never going to be the same, but at least as a starting point to get demos sent back and to get them kind of agreed, even if it's a saxophone that isn't ever going to sound like a real live saxophone. Getting an idea and saying, is this kind of riff or this kind of feeling or this kind of sound what you're after? And then calling in either session musicians, or I'm lucky to have, a small group of close friends that we work together to produce. So, yeah, it's collaborative, but I'd say the majority of it is kind of me on my own solo, yeah.
And how long would it take to compose a track? Say a big client said, we want a track sounding a little bit like this. Would it be a matter of hours, days, weeks? Say for a 60-second ad.
Yeah, it really, really depends. And I'll give you the kind of shortest and longest versions. I think some projects I've probably managed at the best case scenario to kind of complete start to finish in 2 or 3 hours. That's rare. That's if I know exactly what I'm doing. We've kind of chatted. I've got a very clear brief, and it happens to just come out first or second time. They happen to be very happy, and maybe there's just a few tweaks. But then other projects that have gone on, that I'd maybe set aside a day or two for, that have taken a week, 2 weeks with revisions. And to be honest, neither one is better or worse. I think as long as you're prioritizing ensuring that the result is what's needed for the project, I think that's fine. And quite often, even though I think that the projects that have taken longer have been where the feedback is obviously, there's been more feedback. And initially as a composer, if you get some feedback that's kind of not instantly positive, my reaction at least is to kind of get slightly defensive and kind of think, I think it's okay, isn't it?
Yeah,
and then actually,
very natural, isn't it?
I think it is. But actually, those projects in the end are quite often the best, because having someone that's being really kind of what's the word? Kind of critical, but also the perfectionism in that.
That's it. Yeah,
is useful.
It's a bit like that film Whiplash. I mean, hopefully not ending like that. But, that being pushed to make something like better. Yeah. Or sometimes not better. Sometimes you will prefer something that the client doesn't, and Yeah, that's how it is sometimes. What do you think some of your main challenges are when doing client work?
I think it is definitely been on the same page in terms of the direction, kind of creatively, whether that's, and I talked about it earlier in terms of like the emotion and the feeling, or kind of the aesthetic and the style. I think most of the time you get to a point fairly early on where you know what the kind of final result is, what the main aims are. But actually, yes, it's not that rare that you'll think you know what they're after, and actually it's taken a few revisions for you to go, oh, actually now I understand. I attached myself to this particular style, or this is where I was thinking, maybe even kind of just getting caught up in your own excitement of, oh, I'd love to write a track like this, or I've got excited by this particular reference track, or I've got excited by this particular chord progression that I've been working on recently, and you're trying to shoehorn that in for selfish reasons. And then after a few rounds of kind of feedback, you go, oh no, okay, I can see where I was going wrong and wasn't heading in the right direction.
Yeah. So is it difficult to not put yourself as sort of a solo artist in the client work?
Yeah, but equally though, I suppose it's quite nice to work on music that's very different to what you're working on. If you're kind of your own projects, if you're getting a bit stale, or you kind of need a bit of a break, and you're suddenly, if I'm working on some kind of dark electronic music and I'm suddenly asked to write some bright, engaging pop, actually that can be a really nice break, and it can have a positive impact, both, because on both projects, because they're just that contrast kind of excites and inspires, I think. So yeah.
And what does a good brief from a client look like to you versus a bad one?
I think sometimes people are scared to use reference tracks because, and understandably, that the worry would be that a composer takes it literally and just copies or does something too close. But I think having audible examples, they don't have to be reference tracks. It doesn't have to be, we like the piano sound from this, because that can lose some creativity, and it can lead, even from my point of view, you can go, okay, well, I'll just use that kind of piano sound. When you're not kind of thinking out of the box, it can kill off creativity to a certain extent. But even if it's just snippets of tracks or descriptions that aren't just generic words, I think kind of, again, I keep banging on about feelings and emotions, but I think that's really important. But also I feel like I don't do this enough, but having a quick chat on the phone or a quick video call with showing references and talking about things can be so useful. I think it's great that we can all work via email, and most of my work is done on email, and sometimes I prefer it if I'm not feeling particularly social, or just want to get on. But I think actually there's a lot to be said for having phone conversations, video chats to clear things up.
No, that's good, because a lot of the time clients can say that we want it to sound like this, but they don't really know what they want it to sound like.
Yeah.
Whereas directors, working alongside directors, they've got a better understanding.
Yeah.
So do you ever work directly with directors, or do you tend to go through producers, through client?
I do sometimes. It's quite often, the majority of the time I don't. I was actually thinking a particular job that I did where the director, initially I was kind of, maybe this is just my inherent defensiveness, but initially I was kind of thinking, oh, they seem to be kind of getting involved and, being a bit pernickety. I think it sounds fine. And had a sit-down session with this director. It was only a couple of hours, but he had a very specific idea of how he wanted the music to sound. He wasn't a musician. And initially I found that a bit difficult, and I wasn't quite on board with his vision. I think maybe I probably just didn't quite understand it. But actually the result of it was great. And I think it was useful to have someone who isn't musically trained, because as a weakness from a musician's point of view or a composer's point of view is to think, well, that doesn't work. That doesn't fit within the rules.
Because you are the director of the music, right?
Yes.
You are in charge of that. That is your creativity. That's your baby.
Yeah.
What would this untrained director know?
Exactly.
But actually working collaboratively can be good. It does push people.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes thinking out of the box and not being restricted by the rules that you've learnt can be really useful. So the end result of that work was great, actually. Yeah.
Would you do that again, or like to work with more directors?
Absolutely.
In the future?
Yeah. I think it's something that's really useful. if time permits, and if it's if the music's a particularly important part, then absolutely, I think it's a great way of working.
I'm just gonna move on now to your solo project, Brecon. What's the difference when you compose for yourself versus for a brand, say?
Yeah, that is a lot. I mean, the first obvious thing, because you're doing it for yourself, and even if it's for an album that's going to be released on a label and they've kind of set a deadline, you kind of know that deadline is ultimately movable, and really you're kind of in control of that. So instantly you've got a lot more flexibility, which is great. But on the flip side of that,
Do you ever finish a track?
I do. But there's periods. It's actually quite often the process will be, it'll take me, well, again, it varies massively. Some tracks I kind of bang out in a couple of weeks and they're done and they come. But there's other tracks that, there's some tracks of an EP that I'm just finishing now, actually. It's going to be released in June, that I've been kind of percolating for, 18 months, 2 years. And I may have even decided, actually, no, I'm not, they don't speak to me enough, or I'm not, they're not working. We'll leave them for a couple of weeks or a month even, and then listen back and go, actually, no, that is good. I think it's because there's so much freedom, and it's much more of a, truly creative, expression of what I want to put out there and what interests and excites me musically.
Where you are now, what I've listened to recently is a really beautiful blend of electronic mixed with analog sounds. So whether that be drums or whatever.
Yeah.
Have you always had that mix, or has it been sort of a slow progression?
Yeah, I think it has definitely progressed, but I would say the thing that has changed most is involving more organic sounds, trying to bring in some of the more live instruments that through playing in bands, but also as my understanding of harmony is developed, that's become more of a kind of integral part to it. So I think I probably rely less on rhythm as I've developed my musical ability and kind of harmonically and sonically. Yeah.
And do you sing?
No, but actually that's something that I can't sing at all. I've always found it really frustrating. I'd love to be able to sing, and also I've kind of done a fair bit of teaching over the years, and was taught to teach in a way that says that anyone can sing, you just got to find your voice, which I'm not really sure is true. I know I get the point of saying that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, even like something spoken word. Do you write lyrics? No.
It's really not my area of expertise. Well, actually, I say that I have, for a couple of projects I've done for commercial stuff, I can hear the melodies in my head. And I think I've got quite a good ear for melodies, but I literally cannot control the pitch as I'm singing. But there's been a couple of projects where I've been working with vocalists where I've just decided I've got such a strong melody in my head, and I think it would work really well with another voice, that I've just sent voice notes saying, if you can understand what this melody is supposed to be, then give it a go. And actually it worked out really well.
Really?
But after I got over the embarrassment of singing, and I mean, I'm not just saying I can't control the pitch of my voice at all, so it was awful. And she came back with, she found it very funny, but did manage to interpret it.
I mean, that is great that you managed to get that across, even though you can't sing.
Yeah.
It's not easy to move something that's in your mind into reality.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have things in their head that they need to get out, whether that be music or writing. I think maybe society would be better if we had the tools, if we learned at young age to learn instruments, sing, write.
And actually, I think that my advice would be just get it out, even if it, get it out, accept it might not be what you want, but it's going to be closer to what you want than nothing.
Talk to me about your influences.
Not to sound kind of up myself too much. But the challenge when you hear kind of contrasting elements, whether that's kind of polyrhythmic stuff or even harmony that's, you know, not massively dissonant, but just challenges you slightly. I think that's the biggest influence, I think, from jazz, unintentionally, but I like that excitement. I think when it's clear and obvious and resolved and expected, it doesn't really excite me too much. Not to say that my music's some avant-garde dissonant craziness, but yeah.
It's real and it's raw as well. I really like the session you did in the garage in the mechanics.
Right, yeah, that is quite
in
raw,
Easton.
Yeah, thank you.
And I thought that was a wonderful sort of backdrop to your music. What was that track called?
That's Contort.
Contort.
Yeah.
And who were the other musicians in that track?
So they're good friends of mine, John Jack and Matt, who I'm playing with more live now. I've actually got someone else joining us, so we're going to be a kind of 4-piece. And that was the first iteration of the live band,
right?
Which has kind of evolved quite a lot now. And for anyone who hasn't seen that video, it's kind of drum machine, you know, drum pads, synths. And drum pad synths and kind of samplers, which was my first attempt to try and bring electronic music to a live setting. We've actually changed it around quite a lot now, so I'm playing a kind of proper full live acoustic drum kit, and it's much more of a typical band rather than a band playing things perfectly to a metronome with elements from the backing track, which I think was interesting, but ultimately it felt like it didn't have the same natural expression. So kind of the next iteration is much more free and kind of live. And
okay,
but yeah.
And will you play live to audiences?
Yeah, we've got one gig that's kind of almost like a tester gig in August this year. We had our first gig probably a year ago now, supporting Caitlin Aurelia Smith, who's an amazing kind of modular synth artist in the Fleece. But I can't. We're kind of trying to get this new setup of the 4-piece, very much no backing track, completely live, but just including as much of that kind of electronic synth stuff as possible.
Great. Where are you playing?
It is a small festival in Cornwall called Reset Festival. I think it used to be called Bedroot. It's on Bedruthan Steps.
Oh yeah, I've been there. Yeah, great location. Perfect place for a quartet, I would say.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's a smallish stage, and it's a small festival, but we're looking. It'll be a beautiful place to go down. So it might just be a solo gig in the end, but so that's the next step.
You've obviously done a couple of music videos. We did one at Happy Hour when you're in a forest.
Yes.
Have you got any more music videos on the cards? Any more in mechanics or bakeries or things like that?
I don't know what the next. The garage thing actually interestingly came about because I was trying to find a cheap place to do a music video and happened to go. That was my local garage and was kind of there to get my brakes tested or whatever.
Yeah.
And was suddenly like, and was already thinking, where could it be? I was thinking we were looking at doing it in a cave, a disused mine in Wales, and then turned out we couldn't afford that, and it was kind of hard to get times. And I think that was on my mind. And then when I was in there, I was thinking, do you know what? Actually, this would be an amazing, really dirty, greasy, used garage.
I really like the industrial with the rawness of the music, and the dim lighting. And the passion as well. You can tell that you three are very passionate and
thank you.
dedicated. And what struck me in that song was just how real it felt.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, especially when it's all electronic sounds. To get some of that across is
it's really good. And I'm looking forward to future videos or concerts or things like that.
I don't know where it's going to be. My latest thought was actually let's just do it in my music studio and keep things simple. But you've maybe inspired me a little bit to think outside the box and think about another interesting location. Yeah.
So we're talking about ultimate plans. What is your ultimate plan?
I think the main thing for me is just to improve as a musician. There's so many things and so many areas. There's kind of a never-ending, number of things that I want to improve on. I think, especially in the modern day, where you're expected to do kind of everything yourself, whereas back in the day there would have been a songwriter, a lyricist, a producer, and an engineer. whereas you're kind of expected, and so on, session musician, but you're kind of expected to do all that yourself, which is great in terms of you can do that yourself with technology, but it does mean that you're then, quite often I feel a bit the jack of all trades, master of none. So there's so much that I want to learn and develop. But play to more people, put out more music. That's a bit of a rubbish answer.
I mean,
but it's the
it's
truth.
great. You said you've got 2 kids,
Yeah.
right? Do you have any rules to stick for like a work-life balance? Because you work for yourself.
Yeah.
Are there crazy weeks? I mean, you have to be a father and a musician. What does your work-life balance look like?
I think it's less about rules and it's more about accepting that it's just going to be chaotic at times. And luckily, I'm a bit of a night owl, and I do quite often have to and sometimes enjoy and choose to work in the evenings. But I think there's that classic thing, isn't it, when you're a freelancer, that there'll be times where I'm juggling far too much and working late into the evening. And then there's other times where I'm kind of afforded lots of freedom and flexibility to kind of experiment and do little bits. So it all completely depends. But instead of rules, it's more just about acceptance that there's a lot of things that are out of your control. And if your child is ill and you've got to look after your child, then you're not going to be able to do any work. And that's, So,
that's it. It's priority number 1, isn't it?
Suck it up, it would be,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how has the last year financially been for you? Because as an industry, it's been quite a slow year with the strikes in America. Certainly at Happy Hour, we've felt it.
Yeah.
And all the freelancers we work with have felt that squeeze as well.
Yeah.
How's it been for you?
There's definitely been a lot less work. I suppose maybe this is true for most composers. Maybe not quite, but a lot of a fair amount of my income is through royalties, and that goes through the system. You don't get paid straight away from royalties. There's kind of generally about, I think, a 12 to 18 month delay. So I'm probably going to be coming to that soon, although I think it's affected much less than kind of, one-off freelance jobs. But I also do other kind of bits of teaching and mentoring alongside.
Okay, to top yourself up, to keep afloat.
Yeah, also it's something that I love doing, just in terms of it can be a bit of a lonely world writing music. You have to kind of make an effort to go and see people, and I really get a lot out of working with people, and particularly if I can use my experience within music to kind of pass that on and to help other people, then so I can increase that to a certain extent. So it's definitely been a bit of a pinch, but yeah, it's something that you just kind of got to deal with again, isn't it? I suppose, really.
And what keeps you up at night apart from your kids?
Apart from my kids, in terms of what worries me or keeps me up in a kind of excited, or both?
Both, good and bad.
I don't think there's any one particular thing that keeps me up at night.
AI? Is that creeping into what you do?
Yeah, do you know what? I'm always one of those people that initially goes, "Oh no, I'm not bothered about that, mate," and then I think that's out of not understanding it. And recently I've been thinking, yeah, actually, there really is. I think it's already started with music production to be used in kind of ads and stuff. But I also feel, so there was a point where I was starting to think, actually, this could have an impact for all areas of music. But I also feel like that thing, going back to what I was saying earlier about the feelings and emotions, that if a job can be done by AI in terms of music, it's probably not going to be very good. And it's never really, you can't beat the feeling that you get from one human to another, whether that's through music composition or through live performance. So in a way, if we can ship off all the crap that AI can do, and we can just concentrate on the better, more emotive stuff. That's my kind of optimistic hippie version of it.
Yeah, technology is still early days, but it will get to a point where we have to think about how we do things. And how we live, and if we want that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that whole thing of, if it changes things, then we've got to adapt to maybe, so for music, for example, if it puts more emphasis on live music, then is that a bad thing? I think it's probably an area of the music industry that's already, you know, is doing better than record sales, because people, you can't really ever beat that, seeing another human expressing
Create
themselves.
sounds out of nothing, essentially.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So, Will, thank you so much
Brilliant,
for joining
thank
us
you.
on our Happy Hour podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And I hope you keep creating beautiful tracks, not only for big brands and happy hour clients, but also for yourself and for us as listeners to enjoy your music, and certainly go to live gigs.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And see more cool music videos.
Yeah, get out there and support the industry, guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me down. It's been great to talk. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks.